Oscar, 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 Alexander, 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 Alex, Alexander, Alex, Alexander, Alexander, Alex, Alex, Alex. Damien, Daniel, Damien and Daniel, Daniel and Damien, 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 Damien and Daniel, 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 go to sleep. Sleep, 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 Amelia, 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 very cute name. Amelia, Amelia, go to sleep, have sweet dreams, Amelia. Samantha, Olivia. Oh, I'm saying Olivia again, sorry. Samantha, 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 Samantha. Good night, good night, good night, good night. Isabella, 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 Isabella. Go to sleep, 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 sleep. Megan, 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 Megan. Good night, Megan, 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 Megan. Barbara and Susan, Barbara and Susan, Barbara and Susan. Have a great day. Have a great day. Have a great night. Have a great night. Have a great dreams. Good night, good night, good night, good night, good night. Jessica, 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 Jessica,